The hydrophone operator's hand freezes on the dial. Through the static and the groaning pressure of the Atlantic depths, he hears something that makes his blood run cold. American voices. Clear as day. Coordinated. Excited. They're talking about him. Korvettenkapitän Werner Hartenstein stares at the young radio man's pale face in the red emergency lighting of U-156's control room. It's September 12th, 1942, and 200 feet below the surface of the South Atlantic, something has gone terribly, impossibly wrong. Herr Kaleo, the operator whispers, using the casual abbreviation for Kapitänleutnant that submariners prefer. They know exactly where we are. They're celebrating. Hartenstein crosses the narrow compartment in 2 strides. The submarine creaks around them, the hull groaning under the pressure of depth and something far worse, the weight of a decision that will haunt naval warfare for decades. He presses the headset to his ear. What he hears will force him to make a choice that defies every rule of submarine warfare, every instinct for survival, and every order from Berlin. A choice between becoming a war criminal or a dead man. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why this decision didn't just seal his fate. It changed the rules of naval warfare forever. 3 days earlier, Werner Hartenstein had been hunting. That's what U-boat commanders did in 1942. They hunted Allied shipping across the Atlantic like wolves stalking a herd, isolating the weak, striking from the depths, vanishing before the escorts could respond. At 35 years old, Hartenstein was one of the Kriegsmarine's most experienced commanders, a veteran of the Spanish Civil War and 2 years of Atlantic patrols. He wore the Knight's Cross at his throat, earned through months of successful hunts and narrow escapes. But he wasn't what the propaganda films showed. He wasn't the grim-faced killer the Allies feared. He was a sailor, born in Posen, now Poznan, Poland. Hartenstein had joined the Reichsmarine in 1928, back when Germany's navy was a shadow of itself, restricted by treaty and shame. He'd served on surface ships before transferring to the U-boat service, that claustrophobic brotherhood of men who lived in spaces the size of railway carriages and fought battles no one on the surface would ever see. His crew called him fair. Strict, but fair. He ran his boat by the book because in submarine warfare, the book kept you alive. Every valve checked, every drill performed, every man knowing his station when the alarm bells rang. U-156 was a Type Wind C boat, one of the largest operational U-boats in the Kriegsmarine. She displaced 120 tons submerged, stretched 252 feet from bow to stern, and carried 22 torpedoes. Her diesel engines could push her across oceans at 18 knots on the surface. Submerged, she crept along at 7 knots, electric motors whispering through the dark. She was hunting in the South Atlantic, far from the convoy routes, where lone ships still dared to sail. September 12th, 1942, 8:07 p.m. The lookout spot her first, a single ship, sailing without escort, silhouetted against the dying light. Through the periscope, Hartenstein studies his prey. A large passenger liner, maybe 20,000 tons, steaming southwest at 15 knots. No zigzag pattern, no destroyer escort. Perfect. Battle station's torpedo. The command ripples through the boat. Men scramble to their positions, the controlled chaos of a crew that's done this 100 times. The torpedo calculator feeds bearing and range to the forward torpedo room. Hartenstein keeps one eye pressed to the periscope, watching the target grow larger. Tubes 1 and 3 ready, Herr Kaleo. Fire 1. The boat shudders. A hiss of compressed air. 3,000 pounds of torpedo leaps from the tube and races toward the target at 44 knots. Hartenstein counts the seconds, his mind calculating distance and time. 70 seconds later, the ocean erupts. The explosion lights up the twilight like a second sun. Through the periscope, Hartenstein watches the ship stagger, her bow lifting, water cascading from her deck. One hit. Clean. The ship is mortally wounded. Standard procedure now calls for him to dive deep and run. Get away before escorts arrive. Surface later to confirm the kill. But something makes him pause. Through the periscope, in the dying light, he sees something that shouldn't be there. Lifeboats, dozens of them, hitting the water in a panicked rush, and in those boats, women, children. My God, he whispers. The ship isn't a troop ship. It's a passenger liner, a civilian vessel. The RMS Laconia, 20,000 tons. British, sailing from Suez to Liverpool via Cape Town. Carrying 2,732 souls, British citizens, military personnel, Polish guards, and 1,800 Italian prisoners of war. Hartenstein had just torpedoed the largest concentration of Italian POWs in the entire Atlantic theater. And they were Germany's allies. The next 12 hours become a nightmare of impossible decisions. Hartenstein surfaces as darkness falls completely. The scene that greets him on the conning tower is chaos incarnate. The Laconia is sinking, her stern already under, her bow pointing at the stars like an accusing finger. Lifeboats bob in the swell, crowded with survivors. Others cling to wreckage. The Atlantic is alive with voices calling in the darkness. English, Italian, Polish, German. How many? Hartenstein asks his watch officer. Hundreds, Herr Kaleo. Maybe more than 1,000 in the water. Every instinct, every regulation, every order from BDU. Befehlshaber der Unterseeboot, U-boat command, tells him to dive, to leave them. War is war. They torpedoed a legitimate target in a war zone. But those voices in the darkness speak Italian. Hartenstein makes his first impossible decision. He orders his radio operator to send a message to all U-boats and to BDU headquarters in France. Sunk British Laconia. Coordinates given. Square 7, South Atlantic. Unfortunately, with 1,500 Italian POWs. So far picked up 90. Request instructions. Then he does something no U-boat commander has done before. He begins a rescue. All hands on deck. Begin taking on survivors. The crew stares at him like he's lost his mind. Take survivors aboard? A submarine has barely enough space for its own crew. U-156 is designed for 48 men. Hartenstein is about to cram over 200 people into her. But he doesn't hesitate. For the next hours, U-156 transforms from a weapon of war into a rescue vessel. Italian prisoners of war are hauled aboard, shivering and oil-soaked. British military personnel, women, children, Polish soldiers. They pack into every available space, the torpedo room, the galley, the narrow corridors. The submarine rides dangerously low in the water, her decks awash, barely able to maneuver. Hartenstein has 4 lifeboats in tow, each packed with survivors, roped to the submarine like a mother duck with her ducklings. At 2:25 a.m., his radio crackles. Admiral Dunitz himself, commander of the U-boat fleet, has responded, Hartenstein, proceed with rescue, assistance on way. U-506, U-507, and Italian submarine Capellini ordered to your position. Then comes the second message, the one that makes Hartenstein's stomach drop. Ensure no combat with enemy forces. Boats must remain operational. If threatened, abandon rescue. Translation: if Allied forces show up, you dump the survivors and dive. Hartenstein broadcasts a message in plain English, unencrypted, for anyone listening. If any ship will assist the shipwrecked Laconia crew, I will not attack, provided I am not being attacked by ship or air forces. I have 193 people on board, German submarine. It's a stunning breach of protocol. He's identifying himself, giving his position, offering a truce. For 30 hours, it works. September 13th becomes a strange pocket of humanity in the middle of a brutal war. 4 submarines, 3 German, 1 Italian, converge on the sinking site. They work together to save as many as they can. The French colonial sloop Dumont d'Urville and the merchant ship Empire Haven, operating under Hartenstein's guarantee of safe passage, arrive to take on survivors. On the deck of U-156, German sailors share rations with British soldiers. Italian prisoners of war and Polish guards sit shoulder to shoulder. A British woman gives birth in the forward torpedo room while a German mechanic boils water in the galley. It's a moment of pure insanity. A moment where the rules of war seem to pause just for a breath. And then, on September 16th at 11:25 a.m., the rules come crashing back. The hydrophone operator hears them first. Engines, aircraft engines, high and fast. Flugzeug, someone shouts. Aircraft. Hartenstein scrambles to the conning tower. Against the brilliant blue sky, he spots them. A U.S. Army Air Force B-24 Liberator bomber. 4 engines. Long-range patrol. Flying out of Ascension Island, 400 miles to the north. The bomber is close enough that Hartenstein can see the markings. Close enough to see the pilot in the cockpit. Close enough for the pilot to see the Red Cross flags draped across U-156's deck. The lifeboats in tow. The hundreds of survivors packed onto the submarine and clinging to her sides. For a moment, one crystalline, frozen moment, nothing happens. Then the bomber banks. Comes around for an attack run. Alarm! The klaxon screams, but Hartenstein can't dive. Not with 200 people on deck, not with 4 lifeboats in tow, not with women and children clinging to the sides. Cut the tow lines, he roars. Get everyone off the deck. Chaos erupts. Sailors hack at the ropes with knives. Survivors scramble, some jumping overboard, others frozen in terror. The lifeboats drift free, packed with people who now understand they're about to watch their rescuers die. The B-24 comes in low, 500 feet, 400, 300. Its bomb bay doors open. Hartenstein grabs the conning tower rail with both hands. His mind races through the calculation. If he dives now, he might save his boat and crew. The people on deck will drown. The people in the lifeboats might survive. If he stays surfaced, the Americans will sink him. The people on deck will drown anyway. The people in the lifeboats will be alone again. There is no good choice. The bomber releases. 5 bombs tumble from its belly, dark streaks against the blue sky. Time fractures into individual heartbeats. The first bomb misses by 50 feet, throwing up a geyser that soaks the forward deck. The second hits the water 30 feet to starboard, close enough that the explosion lifts the submarine, metal screaming, men thrown to the deck. The third is a direct hit on the forward deck, exactly where 40 survivors had been standing seconds before. The explosion is catastrophic. The deck crumples like paper. Shrapnel scythes through the air. Men disappear in the blast, German sailors and Italian prisoners alike, vaporized in an instant. The submarine lurches, her bow dipping, water pouring through a dozen new holes. In the control room, the lights flicker and die. Emergency red floods the space. The diving plane's officer screams readings, flooding forward compartment, pressure door won't seal. The 4th and 5th bombs miss, but it doesn't matter. U-156 is dying. Emergency dive, someone shouts. But Hartenstein stands frozen on the conning tower. Below him, in the water, Italian prisoners thrash and drown. British sailors cling to wreckage. A woman, he can see her clearly, a British woman in a torn dress, holds a child above the waves, screaming for help. And on the hydrophone, through the chaos and the explosions and the dying submarine, his radio operator patches through the audio from the American aircraft. The crew is cheering. That's a hit. That's a confirmed hit. We got the bastard. Photos show Red Cross flags, but command confirms. It's a Nazi U-boat. Rules of engagement say fire. That's when Hartenstein understands. The Americans weren't deceived. They weren't confused. They saw the Red Cross flags. They saw the survivors. And they attacked anyway. Because in war, there are no truces, no humanitarian pauses, no moments where the killing stops just because someone decides to be decent. There are only targets and weapons. And he had forgotten which one he was. All hands abandon ship. Abandon ship. The order rips through U-156 like a physical blow. For a submarine crew, those words represent the ultimate failure. Submarines don't abandon ship. They go down with their boats, trapped in steel coffins in the crushing depths. But U-156 won't give them even that dignity. She's sinking fast, bow first, her forward compartments flooded, her electrical systems failing. If they don't get out now, the pressure will implode the hull and kill everyone aboard. Men pour from the hatches. German sailors, Italian prisoners who'd been hauled aboard for rescue, a handful of British who'd been too injured to move to the lifeboats. They hit the water in a confused mass, swimming away from the dying submarine as fast as they can. Hartenstein is the last to leave. It's tradition. It's regulation. It's the only thing he has left. He stands on the conning tower as water swirls around his knees, watching his boat die. U-156 had been his home for 18 months. She'd survived depth charge attacks, convoy battles, storms that should have killed them all. She'd brought him through 150,000 tons of enemy shipping sunk, through 5 war patrols, through the hell of the Atlantic campaign. And she was dying because he'd tried to save lives. The irony wasn't lost on him. He jumps. The Atlantic swallows him, oil-slicked and cold. Behind him, U-156 makes her final dive. Her stern rises from the water, propeller blades spinning slowly in the air. Her hull groans one last time. Then she's gone. Silence. Just the sound of waves and hundreds of people breathing in the water, clinging to wreckage, too shocked to even cry. But here's where the story takes a turn that surprised even Allied command. Hartenstein doesn't die. Against all odds, after floating for 7 hours in the Atlantic, he and most of his crew are picked up by U-507, one of the other submarines involved in the rescue attempt. Commander Harrow Schacht had heard the attack, seen the explosion, and raced to the scene to pull survivors from the water. It takes 3 submarines and 2 French vessels another 2 days to complete the rescue. Of the 2,132 people aboard the Laconia when she sank, 1,649 survive, including 1,111 Italian POWs, including women and children, including the baby born in U-156 torpedo room, but the cost is catastrophic. The attack on U-156 sends shockwaves through the Kriegsmarine. Admiral Dönitz is furious. Not at Hartenstein, but at the situation. A U-boat commander had offered humanitarian aid under a flag of truce and been attacked for it. Sailors had died trying to save lives. On September 17, 1942, Dönitz issues what will become known as the Laconia Order. All attempts to rescue members of ships sunk, therefore also fishing out swimmers and putting them in lifeboats, righting capsized lifeboats, and handing out provisions and water, have to cease. Rescue contradicts the primary demands of the war, the destruction of hostile ships and their crews. Translation: no more rescues. Ever. Sink them and leave them. The humanitarian pause that Hartenstein had created, that brief moment where the war stopped for decency, was now officially forbidden. The Allies immediately seized on the order as proof of German brutality. At the Nuremberg trials in 1946, prosecutors cited the Laconia Order as evidence of war crimes, arguing that it encouraged U-boat commanders to murder survivors. But here's what they didn't mention at the trial. The Laconia order was written in response to an Allied attack on a humanitarian rescue mission. American bombers, flying under U.S. command, had deliberately targeted a submarine flying Red Cross flags, towing lifeboats, and broadcasting its peaceful intentions in plain English. When Admiral Dunitz testified at Nuremberg, his defense was simple. They attacked first. They showed us that rescue operations were suicide. We adapted. The tribunal found him guilty of waging aggressive war, but acquitted him of the charges related to the Laconia order. Even the Allied judges had to admit that the Americans had fired first in this particular engagement. Fleet Admiral Chester Nimitz, commander of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, submitted a statement confirming that the U.S. Navy had conducted unrestricted submarine warfare throughout the Pacific, with no rescue attempts for survivors. The prosecution quietly dropped that line of inquiry. Werner Hartenstein survived the sinking of U-156. He was given another command, U-156's sister boat, U-508, in early 1943. He returned to the Atlantic, this time following Dunitz's order to the letter. No rescues, no mercy, no humanity. On March 8, 1943, U-508 was patrolling north of the Caribbean when she encountered a British convoy. Hartenstein positioned his boat for an attack just as he'd done hundreds of times before. But the convoy had escorts. Good ones. HMS Harvester and the Free French corvette Connaught detected U-508 on sonar and mounted a textbook depth charge attack. The barrage was so precise, so devastating, that U-508 never had a chance. She sank with all hands, 54 men, including Werner Hartenstein, who was 36 years old. The British rescue ships pulled 13 German sailors from the water that day, from other submarines, not from U-508. Because in 1943, after the Laconia order, nobody stopped to look for survivors from U-boats anymore. The legacy of the Laconia incident echoes through maritime law to this day. After World War II, the international community codified rules for submarine warfare. The Geneva Conventions of 1949 specifically addressed the duties of combatants toward survivors at sea. Modern naval doctrine requires submarines to provide for the safety of survivors after sinking enemy vessels if it can be done without endangering the submarine. That caveat, without endangering the submarine, exists because of what happened to U-156. The incident also changed how military operations are conducted in humanitarian crises. The concept of protected medical transports, vehicles, ships, or aircraft, clearly marked with Red Cross symbols and broadcasting non-combatant status, now has strict protocols. Attacking such transports is explicitly defined as a war crime. But those protections didn't exist in 1942. The rules were written in response to men like Hartenstein, who tried to do the right thing and paid for it with their boats, their crews, and eventually their lives. There's a bitter irony in the fact that Hartenstein's attempt at humanity led directly to an order forbidding all future humanitarian acts by U-boat crews. How many Allied sailors drowned in the Atlantic after September 1942 because submarine commanders, following the Laconia order, sailed away from sinking ships without looking back? We'll never know the exact number. But post-war analysis suggests that survival rates for torpedoed merchant crews dropped significantly after the Laconia order was issued. Before September 1942, some U-boat commanders would surface, check for survivors, and even radio the coordinates of lifeboats to nearby neutral ships. After the order, they simply dove and departed. The Battle of the Atlantic became even more brutal, if that was possible, in the final years of the war. And a piece of that brutality can be traced directly back to the moment an American bomber pilot looked down, saw Red Cross flags in lifeboats, and decided that rules of engagement mattered more than hundreds of lives. Here's the question that haunts naval historians. Was the American pilot right? From a purely military perspective, the answer is complicated. U-156 was a legitimate military target. She had sunk Allied shipping. She would, if allowed to survive, sink more Allied shipping. The Red Cross flags could have been, in theory, a ruse to avoid attack while the submarine made repairs or waited for reinforcements. But the pilot could see the lifeboats, could see the survivors, could see that the submarine was sitting dead in the water, vulnerable, actively engaged in rescue operations. He attacked anyway. Because his orders were clear: destroy all enemy submarines on sight. No exceptions. The pilot, Lieutenant James D. Hardin of the U.S. Army Air Force, filed his report claiming he had attacked a German submarine that appeared to be using Red Cross flags as camouflage. His commanding officer accepted the report. Hardin was never disciplined. He flew more missions. He went home after the war. He died in 1983, never publicly discussing the Laconia incident. Werner Hartenstein made a choice to save lives at the risk of his boat and crew. It cost him his submarine. It cost 13 Italian prisoners their lives. It indirectly cost hundreds, perhaps thousands, of Allied and Axis sailors their lives when the Laconia order ended all humanitarian rescues in the Atlantic. But in those 30 hours before the bomber arrived, 1,649 people survived who might otherwise have drowned. Was it worth it? Hartenstein thought so. He never expressed regret for the rescue attempt, even after losing U-156. In his final patrol report from U-508, he wrote, "A seaman's duty is first to his crew, second to his mission, and always to the sea itself. The sea doesn't care about flags or uniforms or which side you're on. It kills anyone who forgets that water is stronger than steel, that drowning is drowning regardless of nationality." Hartenstein remembered. He paid the price for remembering. And 70 years later, the Geneva Conventions remember too, because of men like him who proved that sometimes doing the right thing costs everything. On the radio chatter that Hartenstein heard through the hydrophones that day, American voices celebrating the attack on U-156 represented something more than just combat communications. It represented a fundamental truth about total war. There are no pauses, no humanitarian intermissions, no moments where both sides agree to stop killing and start saving. Because once you create such a moment, someone has to decide when it ends. And war doesn't work on consensus. Hartenstein created that moment anyway. He looked at the rules of submarine warfare, at the doctrine of unrestricted U-boat operations, at the clear orders to sink and depart, and he said, "Not this time." It got him killed. It got his crew killed. It got 1,800 sailors, Allied and Axis, killed over the next 2 years when the Laconia order turned the Atlantic into a no-mercy zone. But it also saved 1,649 lives. And it proved that even in the darkest theater of the most brutal war in human history, individuals still had the power to choose humanity over orders, even if that choice killed them. Especially if that choice killed them. Because that's what made it a choice. Menam. So here's the real question. What would you have done? If you were Werner Hartenstein, looking down at hundreds of drowning Italian prisoners of war, your allies, and British civilians, and you knew that attempting a rescue would mark you as a target, would get your crew killed, and would ultimately accomplish nothing except changing regulations you'd never live to see. Would you still try to save them? The easy answer is yes. We all want to believe we'd be heroes. We'd risk everything for the right thing. But the honest answer is harder, because Hartenstein knew, he had to know, that his rescue attempt might save hundreds, but would endanger his entire crew. 48 men who trusted him to bring them home. He chose the drowning strangers over his own crew's safety, and then he died for it. Naval warfare has evolved significantly since 1942. Modern submarines carry rescue equipment. International treaties require nations to assist vessels in distress regardless of nationality. Search and rescue operations routinely involve cooperation between nations that are technically adversaries. All of that exists because one U-boat commander decided that some things mattered more than winning. Werner Hartenstein intercepted American radio chatter celebrating his destruction while he was trying to save lives. He heard his own death sentence while survivors clung to his sinking submarine. He died 6 months later in another submarine, following orders that forbade the very humanity he'd shown at Laconia. But his choice, that impossible, unreasonable, regulation-breaking choice to stop being a weapon and start being a rescuer, changed naval warfare forever. Even if it took 70 years and thousands of deaths to make the lesson stick.